Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now yesterday we tested the newly released Crimson Desert on the minimum system requirements featuring an old i5 and GTX 1060. In today's one I want to take a look at the game again, but this time on my old i7 4790K gaming PC from 2014. This has a 4-core 8-thread CPU overclocked to 4.5 GHz along with 16 gigs of DDR3 clocked at 1866 MHz and a GTX 980 with 4 GB of RAM. So let's get straight into it and see if this old system can handle this game. So the first thing we have to deal with is the compiling shader screen. This didn't take too long on this configuration, looking at about 3 minutes by my estimate. I sort of fired up the game, went and made myself a cup of tea, came back and it had just about finished. So based on that British scale of measurement, I'm going to say about 3 minutes. I then jumped straight into the settings menu where I decided to set everything to its respective lowest, something that we also did yesterday. In fact, the game probably defaulted to this. Yeah, everything was basically set to its respective lowest. For some reason it booted at 2160p and I don't have a 4K monitor. I think I may have some messed up settings in the NVIDIA control panel or something, because this is a 1080p display, so we're just going to ignore that and make sure it is running at 1080p, because if we try and run this at 4K, well, we're probably looking at single digits on this configuration. We'll also make sure the accessibility options are turned down here as a personal preference. Okay, so here we are. We're actually getting very similar performance to what we saw yesterday with the minimum specs build. Surprisingly, this i7 is actually okay. It's holding up quite well. This is certainly a more GPU intensive game, and I think you can get away with a lower end or weaker or older CPUs when playing this. As we can see, the utilization is sitting at around 50% a lot of the time, and our 980 is of course maxed out. We have just 4 gigs of VRAM here, but the game will run at about 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, with these settings, it does still look a little blurry, especially with any upscaling options off. And I think if you have more powerful hardware, you're going to want to enable DLSS or FSR and just set it to native. So native FSR or native DLAA. And that's going to really help clear things up a little bit and make things look a little bit sharper. I mean, we can just about get away with 30 FPS on this configuration with these settings, but I think it's best now to enable some form of upscaling here. So the options menu sort of gave us a bit of a problem. It actually jammed us up a little bit here. Took a couple of moments for the game to unfreeze. I thought it had crashed, but luckily it did not. And once that screen was out of the way, we were back into the visual options menu. Here we can of course choose from DLSS or FSR. We don't actually have access to DLSS, of course. It's just an option that with this game version at the moment we can select for some reason, but it's not going to do anything. Instead, I of course set things to FSR 3.1, but we are going to need to use balance mode in order to get at least 30 FPS. It's a very similar story, in fact, to yesterday's video, whereby we were seeing just about 30 plus frames per second. We're looking at 30 to 40, though our frame time graph is a little bit all over the place. Now this is a 4 gig card, as I mentioned, and it will do a lot better than the 3 gig 1060 that we showcased briefly in the minimum specs video, but I think you are going to be better off with a 30 FPS cap, something we also demonstrated yesterday. Now to do this, we're going to open up Riva Tuner, which comes bundled with MSI Afterburner, the software that I use to see the on-screen stats on the left-hand side here. We're going to set this to 30 FPS, and doing that will completely level out that frame time graph, making things a lot more consistent. As you can see here, performance I think is much improved, although we're not getting quite as high numbers now. We're not getting 35, 36 FPS. This is a more pleasant experience because of the consistency. There was a little bit of stutter when entering combat or trying to start a fight, but it's going to feel a lot more pleasant overall. And if you're using older hardware like this, then yeah, you're definitely best off with a 30 FPS cap if you're getting just over 30 FPS as an average. We also have the option to drop things to 720p with native FSR upscaling if we want to. This is going to give us very similar performance to 1080p with FSR 3.1 balanced. So yeah, that is an option that you could consider if you want to, but there are still going to be frequent dips and drops here. Now, so far it's been the GTX card that has been the primary limitation here. The i7 has actually been holding up quite well despite its age and its 4 cores and 8 threads. So I decided to swap the card out here for a 3070, a more modern and more powerful RTX GPU. As we can see here, with the medium preset and DLAA enabled, performance wasn't too bad. As expected, the CPU becomes the limitation, even at 4.5 GHz here, but it's not the worst bottleneck I've ever seen. In fact, there will be some moments where the GPU still hits at least 90% utilization, even in and around town here. It really isn't bad at all from the 4790K. This definitely isn't an incredibly CPU intensive game from what I've tested. I think it relies more on a powerful GPU, but we're getting close to 60 FPS with the medium preset, and I think we could certainly hit at least 60 FPS with a few more tweaks, for example dropping the settings back down to low, or perhaps enabling DLSS quality instead. This is with DLSS 4 mode. As you can see here now, we're getting at least 60 frames per second. I did, however, notice a few more texture issues here. I think this may be because of the limited core and thread count with the i7. A few things were a little late to load, like windows and barrel textures, as well as bricks on buildings, but overall I am quite surprised at how well the i7 is holding up, along with the 3070. This isn't a pairing I'd recommend, an old i7 that's at least 10 years old with a 3070 or any modern RTX card, but it's nice to see that it can give us a somewhat playable frame rate in Crimson Desert here. I'm not sure how this will continue as we progress through the game, but visually it's not bad at all here, and it's a vast improvement upon the lowest settings that we have showcased so far. All that blur as well that we were seeing with upscaling off has now gone too. But there we go, the i7 4790K still kicking. This is with a Z97 board, by the way. That supports overclocking and secure boot, something that some modern games do require. So there may be a chance that if you're using an older motherboard, certain titles won't boot. Not sure if this is one of them, but it's something I've encountered with Battlefield 6, for example, that requires secure boot here. As I got into combat with this test system, after singing the i7's praises, there were definitely a few freezes here and there, but I think that is to be expected with a processor of this age, and overall it did a lot better than I was initially anticipating. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have this game and how well it runs if you have an older rig, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.